Hello, comrades. I thought this would be an interesting topic for a video. I watched a talk with Slavoj Zizek, who is, I believe, Slovenian Marxist sort of author, philosopher, thinker, and he does this interesting, he looks at ideology sort of through. He uses a lot of Hegel, but he mainly uses a lot of Freud, and I think Lacan is the other one, like psychoanalysis. And I've been watching a lot of his talks recently, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that he's more of a philosopher. He's not really a political speaker as much, even though he does a lot of political stuff too. But anyway, so what I like about him is that I agree with a lot of his points, even a lot of his controversial points, but I also disagree with quite a lot of his points. So he's always really thought-provoking in his talks, at least for me. Now, of course, he's a supporter of communism, but he's also very, very brutal in his criticism of previously existing, socialist countries. He's from Yugoslavia, of course, and I don't necessarily even agree with many of his critiques, but it's interesting nonetheless. Anyway, so I watched this talk where he was talking with Kotkin. I don't really know how to pronounce that. I think it's Kotkin. Guy who wrote this new Stalin book. It's supposed to be a 3-part book eventually, but I'm pretty sure that by now there's only 1 volume out. And there were a couple of interesting points. Like, I like that Slavoj was trying to emphasize that it's this bourgeois criticism of Stalin is wrong, and it's in a way the bourgeois criticism of Stalin is even a lot softer than a leftist criticism of Stalin. Although, I mean, it's ironic. Most Trotskyists and most anarchists actually share the bourgeois view, but a genuine leftist criticism of Stalin would be a lot harsher than the bourgeois criticism. What do I mean by that? Well, the bourgeois criticism is that Stalin was crazy. That's what they all say. They say, oh, Stalin was crazy, that's why he killed all these people. And the anarchists say that, the Trotskyists say that. They say, oh, if only Trotsky had come to power instead of Stalin, it's all because of this one guy. It's totally, idealist, metaphysical, like, oh, it's just because this one guy, he changed everything, nothing else matters, it's just because this one man, Stalin, just happened to come in power. And they say that, he didn't do these things for any particular reason, he just did it because he was crazy. Which is a childish view, in my opinion. It's ridiculous. So Slavoj was trying to emphasize that these things that happened, they happened because of policy and because of material reasons, not because the guy was just crazy. Unfortunately, Kotkin didn't really fully take that into account. He kind of just reverted back to the crazy theory, because he outright says that in his analysis of the 20s, everything makes sense, but then when he gets to the 30s, he doesn't get it. He openly admits that he's baffled. He thinks that, Stalin is crazy. He has to be crazy. Now, I think the reason why that is because, because he's saying, like, oh, how can he kill all these people? Well, I mean, the thing is, maybe he didn't. I'm not talking about a specific person, I'm talking about numbers here. Even though the numbers game is usually kind of pointless, but I'm just saying, you think it's crazy that somebody could kill like 30 million people? I know, that's crazy, but he didn't do that. I mean, there's obvious, verifiable ways to check that. Now, what surprised me was that he claims that he looked at all these sources, these primary source materials, but clearly he hasn't, at least not in most cases. And even if, like, I mean, he points out that, okay, Stalin signed these lists of people who were to be executed or to be arrested and then tried, and then, if the investigation decides that they're guilty of treason, then they will be executed or sentenced to prison. Stalin signed big lists of, people, but he didn't collect the evidence. He was just like, the lists were handed to him, and he would sign them. The NKVD would tell him, these are the people, you gave us permission, now we need your authority, so sign the piece of paper. So he signs it. He didn't just like hand pick all those people. And, not only that, but those lists are, in the thousands. They're not even in the tens of thousands of people, let alone hundreds of thousands or millions. So I think it's pretty weird to say that he was crazy because, oh, he just, hand-picked millions of people to die. No, he never did that. It was thousands, and he didn't even hand-pick them. He just authorized it. My opinion is that, of course, I think the purges were, in principle, justified. In the sense that it's pretty damn, certain that they saved the Soviet Union from losing the war. Every country had something like that. I mean, the United States had the House Committee for Un-American Activities, which originally was, set up to fight fascist infiltrators and saboteurs and spies. But they, of course, changed it to fight communists later. But, that was the exact same thing that the Soviet Union had. So in that sense, the purges were totally justified. Now, of course, the purges were not entirely just because of that. There were other aspects. So the party purge and then the purge of the bureaucracy, that was kind of the Nazi infiltration part. But then there was the fight against kulaks and deportation of kulaks and stuff like that. That's where the big numbers come from, when they deported like tens of thousands of kulaks. That's where the big numbers come from, and that's totally different. Then there's the military purges, like the military purge as well. We're talking about small numbers here, and especially when, like, a lot of people were investigated, but not that many officers were actually killed. The numbers that I use are from Getty's book, The Road to Terror, or I think it's Stalin's Terror, that's the one. And in that book, it gives the numbers of how many officers were actually investigated, how many were temporarily taken off, off duty, and then put back. It's a small number. We're talking like 11,000 people investigated and 10,000 people put back. The thing that, like, originally I thought that Kotkin's remarks were pretty good, pretty, reasonable. He's not a leftist by any means, by the way, but I thought his remarks were pretty good, but then pretty quickly it kind of got absurd, because he said stuff like, the reason they didn't have many musicians in the gulags was because Stalin loved music. Like, what kind of nonsense is that? That's lunacy. But, in general, I think some of his remarks were quite good. He said that, I think he would have maybe given better, more insightful remarks if he would know a little bit more about leftism, because for example, he said that that Lenin's idea that there should be independence for nations, that it was just sort of an opportunist concession, when in reality it's an anti-imperialist move. It's a principle thing. It's not a opportunist move. And I don't think, and And I think his reason for calling it opportunism is just because he doesn't understand. It's not because he wants to attack Lenin. Because he said that he believed that. I mean, the thing I found most interesting was that he said that Lenin and Stalin were absolutely genuine in their communism, because that's also something that an anarchist told me recently. He said, "Oh, Stalin is a anti-communist." Like, no, he wasn't. You know, Kotkin says that in private, they were all just as communist as they were in their public speeches and in their propaganda. They were privately they even used the same rhetoric, the same lingo, talking about finance capital, talking about imperialist encirclement in their private conversations. So he said that they were absolutely genuine and that they were very principled individuals, very serious individuals. So I don't think when he says that Lenin used the national question issue as an opportunist move, I don't think that was an attack. I think that he just doesn't understand what it's all about. I thought it was pretty hilarious also when he said that when he gave his assessment of Trotsky. I think that's probably correct, because he said that Trotsky was just outmaneuvered by Stalin because he was so stupid. He was so arrogant, and that's exactly what I've always thought, that Trotsky didn't properly defend his own positions. Partly because his position was stupid, but mainly because he was so arrogant. He was like, this stupid Georgian, like, he's not gonna, like, I'm just gonna make one charismatic speech because, Trotsky was more charismatic than Stalin. And then he's gonna just come back into popularity, but that never happened. And then when Trotsky was kicked out, he kind of refused to accept it. But also, this is also reflected in Trotsky's writings, because Kotkin himself also pointed out that Stalin always emphasized that he was Lenin's student, a disciple, a pupil of Lenin, whereas Trotsky always tried to paint himself as an equal of Lenin, and saying that he corrected Lenin on this occasion, proved Lenin wrong on this occasion. And by the way, he didn't. I mean, all those instances are instances when Trotsky was wrong and Lenin just happened to disagree with Trotsky. But on all those instances, Trotsky says that he tried to correct Lenin. And of course, all those instances would later backfire, and Stalin would say, like, see how this treacherous little snake is always fighting tooth and nail against Lenin, which is true, And even though it's kind of weird, Trotskyists try to deny this to this day. They say that Trotsky was Lenin's best student, even though it's pretty clear that Trotsky disagreed with Lenin a lot of times. Stalin almost never did. But those are some remarks about the talk. I will put it in the description. I think you probably will get something out of it. It's kind of Stalin bashing, of course, because Kotkin is a right-winger, and Zizek doesn't really step in and defend Stalin or anything. I mean, he's not a big pro-Stalin guy anyway. Kotkin suffers from not really understanding Marxism very well, and also from apparently not really sticking to primary source materials as well as he claims. Although, when it comes to death tolls, I mean, he said that 5 million people starved, and that was basically the death toll. I mean, at one point he said that, but then later he goes back to talking about these abstract millions and millions of people who died. I don't really know. I haven't read the book, so I don't know if there's any specific numbers used in the book. One thing that he never mentioned, which I think should have been brought up, is that he says that there was no reason for these policies that they were necessary. He says that Stalin collectivized agriculture only because he was the most extreme in a way and had the willpower to do it. I don't think that's the case. I think the reason he did that was because he felt that they had to do it. Because remember, he he didn't advocate that in like 25, 26 when Trotsky was advocating it. And I don't think that's an opportunist move. Like some Trotskyists will say, oh, that was just an opportunist move. He just tried to isolate Trotsky. No, that's not the reason. Actually, Stalin's argument for not collectivizing agriculture in 25 or 26 is that he says that it will be an economic catastrophe because their socialist agriculture sector is tiny, that they cannot replace the Kulak agriculture with socialist agriculture this quickly. Then in late 28, he begins to argue that, you know, this is what I said before, but now I think we might be able to do it. And I think, you know, if they were in an ideal situation, he would probably say, no, let's wait a couple more years. But basically he says that, yeah, we might just be able to do it. It's going to be rough, but we probably can do it, and they did. But the reason why he felt the need to do it so early and rush it, you know, kind of rush it into beginning, was because he felt that, you know, he said the famous quote, we have to industrialize in 10 years or otherwise we will be crushed by capitalists. So I don't think that he had like special willpower and just thought that they will do it because they are just so hardcore. No, I think that he just absolutely felt that it was necessary. And, you know, how correct could he possibly have been? I mean, he was perfectly correct, because in pretty much 10 years they were invaded. So that's one of the best predictions in human history. Those are some of my remarks on the subject. If you want to watch the talk, I will put the link into the description. Just be warned, it's pretty right-wing, very much like bashing Stalin, a lot of attacks, but you might get something out of it. Okay, see ya.